Imagine waking up one day and suddenly remembering every detail of your past life, every joy, every heartbreak, every triumph, and every failure. It's a thrilling concept, but also a terrifying one. Welcome to ReddFic, where we bring you the most fascinating stories from Reddit that will make you question everything you know about reality. Today's topic is going to blow your mind. What if everyone suddenly remembered their past lives? And what if you were hiding a secret so big that it could change the course of history? That's what we're exploring today. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to have your mind blown. Our first story. Ever since I was a kid, I was able to see people who never existed. My parents thought it was my overactive imagination. You must be thinking that my situation is like the sixth sense, but it's not. I can always tell when the people I see are real or not. You see, they always appeared pale. Not ghostly pale, just grayish, like a strong wind will dissolve them. But that changed. As I grew, so did their form. How do I put this? They started solidifying. I could still tell them apart because they were still very pale. But now it was as if my memory had started taking a form. When I was a kid, I tried to get the young ones to play with me, but they always refused. Not verbally, never verbally. They just shook their heads and continued to stare at me. I didn't mind. I was a kid after all. But things started to change as I grew up. They weren't just staring and replying non-verbally. They started saying the same thing. The same word, in fact, each and every single one of them. Why? I was 15 and going about my day. I used to the pale strangers that always hovered near me, whispering why I ignored them. How can I answer something I don't understand? It was during my history class that one appeared beside my teacher and pointed at me in anger and screamed, "Murderer!" I stared at it dumbfounded, thinking it was mistaken. But it kept getting closer to me, screaming murderer. From that day onwards, no matter how many people I saw, they all screamed murderer, and I had no idea why. I was a good kid, kept my nose clean, walked the straight line, but all the people calling me murderer scared me. Were they predicting my future? Were they telling me I was destined to become a horrible person? The ifs and buts kept me up at night, where more of them lingered. But life goes on, and so did I. I got into an engineering college, and I was pretty happy after a long time, after the day I first heard the word murderer. And that, out of all things, seemed to be the trigger, my happiness. The intensity of them appearing increased, so did their accusations. But the bottom line was the same, murderer. I think I forgot to mention their appearance. I apologize, there are so many of them that I forgot. They all can be divided into groups from different time periods. From early humans, who just pointed and gestured wildly. Then came the Greco-Romans and so on. You get my point. Every civilization since the dawn of humans was haunting me for some reason. The reason became clear when I was up researching one night. I was looking into mysterious deaths, and I recognized a face that had become to me as familiar as my own. It was a Roman general who screamed, "Murderer," more than anyone else. Curious, I started reading. There wasn't much about him, as he was one of many. As it was a group photo, there was no name, just the circumstances under which they all died. Youth, poison, they were all poisoned. An unsettling sensation ran through me, but surely it was a coincidence. I tried to shrug off the feeling, but it stayed with me, and now, ever since I found out that the man actually existed, the frequency of people appearing increased, which I didn't think was possible. They continued to scream at me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Study was the furthest thing from my It was after 2 sleepless nights that I decided to do some research into the history of most unusual deaths. As the morning dawned closer, my ears rang not from the screams, but from silence. Absolute silence. The one before the storm. Instead, I found accusatory gazes directed at me as I read page after page and saw a lot of familiar faces, and slowly the realization hit me. I was the murderer. I did murder all these people. These weren't just ghosts. These were the people I had murdered in my past lives, and none of them had gotten justice. Horrified, I closed my laptop and looked at the ones present. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. It was futile, but the guilt had started to stick to my soul like a parasite. A woman dressed in regal attire laughed hollowly. "Murderer." I closed my eyes as their voices once again got louder. My thoughts started to spiral out of control. Each of them was murdered by past me, every single one of them. Maybe that was who I am, a murderer. It was proven true, life after life. What if something happened that made someone else my victim? The thought made the bile rise up my throat. I couldn't let that happen, could never let that happen. Through tears fogging my vision, I saw a blade, and in that moment, it made perfect sense. As the cold steel touched my wrist, a sudden quiet filled the room. I had never felt more certain about anything in my life as I felt about the blade against my pulse. As the blood dripped down my wrist, I felt a calm spread over me. I was never going to hurt anyone again. "He never did that," was the last thing I heard. I woke to white sheets and the beeping of the life support machine. No. I looked at the room, panicked. Didn't they understand? It wasn't until I saw the familiar pale face that I relaxed a bit. "In all your lives, you never did that," she said softly. Her voice was melodic like an angel, and I felt guilt rushing up once more. "I'm sorry," I whispered, as tears rolled down my cheeks. She smiled softly. "This time, I know you are." I tried to say thank you, but she was gone in a blink of an eye. I waited for them to turn up, but no one did. That was 5 years ago. I'm still trying to make penance for everything I did, trying to unearth the cause of death of the ones I could. But they never appeared again. Now listen. The second story. A carpenter, I told them. An Aztec. A monk. A religious preacher. Many more. All completely normal, boring lives. Yep. Nothing to see here. Most people were ecstatic if they had something big under their belt. A life with meaning and purpose. A life that changed the world. I met the guy who was Napoleon once. He never stopped bragging about the battles, going on endlessly about Waterloo, and how he cared so much for his soldiers. Ugh, that guy was insufferable. When everyone first remembered I was a child, and at first I had told the truth when asked whose lives I had lived. But after a sharp bit of reprimanding for lying, I quickly learned that even if you were telling the truth, oftentimes no one cared if they didn't want to believe it. So I sat, and I listened to the old souls I was, and am, and will be. That seems to be the only difference between me and the others. They can only see their past lives, but I can see who I will be too. I will be a carpenter again. I will be a monk again. I will be a preacher in the far future when there aren't too many humans left in this world. The ones I was can talk to me, but the ones I will be can't, I guess. That makes sense. They. And by they I mean I haven't lived those lives yet. All in good time does the wheel of life turn, or so the monk said. Ignore them. For they mean not what they say. They know not what they do, says the carpenter. I find it hard to believe him. But I know he's right in my heart. Demand blood. Burn all who stand before you. as wood before a raging flame, says the Aztec. But he looks weird. I don't listen to him ever. And I'm not even sure he was even a human. The dude has feathers and scales and could apparently fly. Look for the divine essence of truth. Embody the spirit of righteousness as a Hara Mazda gives you the strength to do, says the preacher, when someone was yelling at me for something I couldn't control. Nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded, says the monk before he goes back to meditating. I know he's right. They're all right. They're always right. The people around me aren't inherently bad. They're just ignorant and misguided. It sure would be tough to deal with them if I didn't have all of them helping me. Even the feathery Aztec helps because he teaches that violence and anger is in human nature and must be reconciled, or you'll eventually blow up over something, whether it matters or not. So, Mr. Silent over there in the corner, what is your name? The teacher asks. Yeshua, I quietly murmur. That's interesting. That's a Hebrew name with a very famous namesake. He replies. I think back to the carpenter. He chuckles inside me. I reply, yea, I know. Now listen. The third story. It started out as a clickbaity title in the newspapers. Whole town claims to remember previous lives. Slowly but inevitably, it spread all over the world like a pandemic, and it caught everyone until it couldn't be dismissed as nonsense anymore. There were conspiracy theories in abundance. The Illuminati used radio masts to transmit wavelengths that could alter memories. Others claimed that the lizard people secretly poisoned the food to make us hallucinate. Religious folks thought it to be a message from their God, a sign to pay for their sins in their present life and the past. Whatever the truth may be, the fact remains that suddenly everyone on Earth has vivid recollections from previous lives. Suddenly, history is no longer about carefully studying old diaries or investigating dig sites. The past is with us. The job is transformed into interviewing people and figuring out whether they're lying or speaking the truth. Hundreds of lunatics claim to be reincarnations of Hitler, Mao, Stalin, or other infamous mass murderers. International think tanks have been set up to discuss the question whether someone can be retroactively punished for crimes committed in the past. Philosophers can't stop discussing if or to what degree the current person is the same as their past. Psychologists are working overtime to help people reconcile with who they were in the past. Some folks have only lived a couple of lifetimes. Others have lived hundreds. When the memory of 100 lives floods the brains, it breaks them. Until people don't know who they are anymore, or rather, when they are. And me? I have only lived 4 previous lives, and in one, I died from tuberculosis when I was 8. I hadn't much more luck in another life. I died in Normandy in 1944, never made it to the beach. The third is boring, working long and hard hours in a mine for far too little, while having to take care of far too many kids, all of whom ended up in the mines as well. As far as anyone is concerned, I only lived 3 previous lives. Seems like it's my destiny to always be a nobody, I joked if anyone asked. I only lived common lives. Honestly, they were pretty boring, and death came early in all of them. And of all the lies people told about their pasts, completely making them up or glorifying them, reliving the past has never been so fashionable. Mine might be one of the biggest ones. Every night, I see the faces of my victims, sharp and distinguishable, even after some centuries. I can't sleep anymore out of fear of the images, and out of fear that one of my victims remembers my past self, and they'll come looking for me for all the pain I have caused them. And I pray to God that if they ever find me, they show me the mercy that I didn't show them. Now listen, the fourth story. So, what were you in your last life? Grinned Fred at me as we walked home from school. Let me guess, you must have been a frog, from what we witnessed in swim class today. I have no idea, man. I repeated a practiced lie. I think I was some kind of lizard. I spent all week thinking about snails. At least you had thoughts. Fred groaned. I spent the entire Enlightenment in geography class staring at the sun. I think I was a shrub. The Great Enlightenment occurred during our monthly oral geography exam. We suspected that Mrs. Steer, the wizened old crone who taught the class, preferred oral exams because she had difficulty reading written exam papers. I remember holding my breath when she approached my desk. Koji, je glavni grad Argentine, she intoned. She tapped her ruler on my desk and repeated, Koji je glavni grad Argentine, while I stared at her, completely confused. Then she caught herself and her voice trailed off. I watched in bewilderment as she tentatively mumbled a few words and then hobbled back to her desk in a daze. The same strange behavior seemed to have befallen my classmates. Fred, in particular, had a look that strongly reminded me of the monkeys in my lab when I electrocuted them. Wait, something clicked in my head, and I knew what I had to do next. Humanity would need to develop the ability to control the flood of conflicting memories and experiences, or it would starve to death whilst reminiscing about long-gone lives as inconsequential plants and insignificant amoeba. As I would later discover, I was lucky that Mrs. Steer was an exception with a past human life. Albeit a 13th century Serbian, I would need her help infiltrating my former laboratory, fixing my machine, and undoing the Enlightenment. Now listen, the fifth story. You'd think people would be ashamed to own up to the terrible things they did in their past lives. You'd be wrong. From the moment humans were suddenly able to recall their previous existences, more people came forward claiming they'd been Hitler than those claiming they'd been Gandhi. Netflix even made a reality show about that. The goal was to find out if the real past Hitler was amongst its contestants. It wasn't. Every episode, a Hitler aspirant would be sent home after his claims had been disproven. On the farewell interview, the producers got the contestants to open up about their reasons for lying. The conclusion was always the same. These people had discovered they had led countless boring lives over and over. Their claim to Hitler's identity was a desperate attempt to get some much-needed attention and recognition in this lifetime. Those people don't know how lucky they are to remember an ordinary past. I'd give anything to be in their place, because I didn't remember anything at all. While everyone else had their vivid recollections, I experienced the same feeling of trying to remember what it was like before you were born. Not even the vision of a black screen, just a general sense of non-existence. The only possible explanation is that, unlike every other human being currently on Earth, I never had a past life. I have no idea where I came from. Was I even supposed to be here? What does this make me? I wondered if I should come forward. If I should drop the fictional stories I'd been telling ever since to convince those around me I also had a handful of uneventful past lives. Maybe I could be the key to the eternal question. Maybe I will be famous worldwide as the youngest and purest soul alive. But having no past lives also gives me no guarantees I will have any future ones. If that's really my one and only time around, I just want to live in the simplest, most common way possible. Wow, that was intense. I can't believe the secrets that people were hiding in their past lives. I'm sure you're just as blown away as I am. But don't worry, we've got plenty more where that came from. So, if you want to be the first to know about the most mind-blowing stories from Reddit, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. At ReddFic, we believe that the best stories come from real people just like you. So, join our community, do conversation, share your own stories, and be a part of the ReddFic community. Remember, when it comes to Reddit stories, you never know what you're going to get. But one thing's for sure, it's always going to be epic. See you in the next episode.